You ever notice how a video game doesn't render the whole universe? Not really. You walk through the forest, the trees sway, the sunlight hits the water, the mountains sit there in the distance, blue and silent, like they've been waiting for you forever. But behind you? Nothing. Not in the way you think. The machine isn't wasting power building every leaf on every branch in every direction. It's drawing what you need, what you can see, what matters to the player. The rest is math, potential, a waiting room. Now think about your house right now. The room you're not in. The drawer you haven't opened in 3 weeks. The street outside your window. Is it there? I mean, really there? Or is it being generated the second you look? Now, I know how weird that sounds. It sounds like the kind of question you ask at 2:17 in the morning when the screen is too bright, the room is too quiet, and you've had just enough caffeine to start distrusting furniture. But here's the problem. Modern physics keeps whispering the same thing from the walls. Reality has limits. Reality has resolution. Reality behaves differently when it's being watched. And some very serious people have asked a very unserious sounding question. What if the universe isn't a place? What if it's a program? Alright, you made it. The signal's not perfect, but it's coming through. If you're listening to this right now, I'm guessing you've had that moment. The one that shows up late when everything's quiet. Where you look at something totally normal and your brain goes, hang on, that doesn't feel right. That's because the official version of reality is always so clean. Everything's an accident. Everything's a coincidence. Nobody meant anything by it. But then you start lining up the little details, and it stops being clean. It starts to look consistent. And I'm not saying that proves a grand plan. I'm not saying you should panic. I'm just saying it's hard to sleep once you notice the pattern. So tonight, we're going to do this the way it's supposed to be done. No yelling, no fake certainty, just a story, a trail of crumbs, and one question. What if the normal explanation is the cover story? Welcome to the Tin Foil Diaries. Now, let's open tonight's file. Welcome back to the Tin Foil Diaries, the show where we don't just question the story, we question the screen the story is playing on. I'm your host, and tonight's entry is called The God in the Machine, the Simulation Hypothesis. This one isn't about a secret bunker. It isn't about a missing file. It isn't about some committee of old men dividing up the planet over brandy and blood oaths. No, this entry goes much deeper than that. Because the simulation hypothesis says that the bunker, the file, the old men, the planet, the blood, the brandy, you, me, the chair you're sitting in, the air moving through your lungs right now, all of it could be code. Tonight we're following this signal down. We're going to look at the strange behavior of physics, the Oxford argument that turns reality into a statistical trap, the quantum experiments that make the universe feel less like a machine and more like a rendering engine, the claims about error-correcting codes buried in the math, the new information physics theories that some scientists say point toward a simulated universe. And finally, we're going to ask the question nobody really wants to ask. If this is a simulation, who built it? And what happens when the characters start looking for the programmer? Let's run the program. Here's the weird thing about reality. It doesn't feel like it should have rules. Not hard rules. Not absolute boundaries. If space is space, why can't you just keep zooming in forever? If time is time, why does it slow down? If the universe is real in the way we usually mean real, Why does it behave like it has a maximum refresh rate? Let's start with the speed of light. Roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. That's the cosmic speed limit. Nothing with mass can reach it. Nothing can exceed it. You can pour energy into a particle forever, and the universe will still hold up its hand and say, "No further." That alone is strange, because in a computer system, limits are everything. Bandwidth, clock speed, processing capacity. A machine can only update so much information in a given slice of time. And if the simulation hypothesis is right, then the speed of light may not be a poetic law of nature. It may be the maximum speed at which the system can transfer information across the map. The universe saying, that's all the hardware can handle. Now look at relativity. Einstein showed that as you move closer to the speed of light, time slows down relative to observers outside your frame of reference. That's not speculation. It's a central prediction of special relativity, confirmed by experiments and built into systems like GPS. But in simulation theory, time dilation takes on a darker flavor. It starts to sound like lag, like the CPU slowing local time so the universe can keep up. Like the system is saying, "You're moving too fast. I need to load the next frame." And then there's the Planck scale. At extremely tiny distances, physics reaches a point where our current theories stop behaving normally. The Planck length is often discussed as a kind of lower boundary where the familiar structure of space-time may lose meaning. It doesn't prove space is pixelated, but it does make the metaphor irresistible. Because from far away, a digital image looks smooth. A face, a landscape, a sky. But zoom in far enough and the illusion breaks. You find squares, you find units, you find the grid. And that's where this theory gets under your skin. Not because it proves anything, but because reality keeps doing things that feel suspiciously familiar to anyone who's ever watched a loading screen. A speed limit, a resolution limit, a rendering problem, a universe that seems infinite until you start looking too closely. Now, this isn't just internet mythology. The modern simulation hypothesis became serious because of a philosopher named Nick Bostrom. In 2003, Bostrom published a paper called "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" And what he built wasn't really a theory. It was a trap. A logical trap. Bostrom argued that at least one of three propositions is likely true. Humanity never reaches a post-human stage capable of running ancestor simulations. Advanced civilizations reach that stage but almost never run such simulations. Or we are almost certainly living in a simulation. Let's translate that into human language. Option 1. Civilizations like ours don't survive long enough. We destroy ourselves. With nuclear war, artificial intelligence, climate collapse, engineered pandemics, asteroids, something gets us before we become gods. Option 2. We do survive. We become unimaginably advanced. We develop computers powerful enough to simulate conscious beings, entire planets, maybe entire civilizations. But for some reason we don't do it. Maybe it's illegal. Maybe it's unethical. Maybe our descendants look back at us and think, no, those poor animals suffered enough the first time. Which is honestly optimistic, because humans, historically, do not have a great track record of refusing to run experiments just because they might be a little morally complicated. Then comes option 3. We survive. We build the machines and we run the simulations. Not 1, not 10, millions, billions. Ancestor simulations, historical simulations. What if Rome never fell simulations? What if the asteroid missed the dinosaurs simulations? what if one tiny planet in the 21st century discovered artificial intelligence before it discovered wisdom simulations? And if there are billions of simulated realities and only one base reality, then what are the odds that you happen to be in the original? That's the trap. Bostrom's argument doesn't say, "Look, I found the code." It says, if advanced civilizations can simulate conscious minds, and if they choose to do it at scale, then simulated minds may vastly outnumber biological ones. And in that case, statistically speaking, you're probably not sitting in the basement of reality. You're somewhere upstairs in a copy of a copy of a copy. Now, there are some serious objections. Astrophysicist David Kipping published a Bayesian analysis arguing that when uncertainty is accounted for, the odds of our being simulated may be below 50%, though they would rise sharply if future humans actually began producing ancestor simulations. So this isn't settled. It's not proof, it's not a verdict, but it is a question with teeth, because the simulation hypothesis doesn't need to prove the universe is fake. It just needs to make real feel mathematically lonely. Now here's where things really start to go off the rails, because philosophy can be dismissed. You can say Bostrom is playing probability games. You can say it's a thought experiment with too many assumptions. That's fair. But then quantum mechanics walks into the room, and quantum mechanics does not care if you're comfortable. At the smallest scales, particles do not behave like tiny marbles. They behave like probabilities, possibilities, mathematical ghosts. The famous example is the Double-Slit experiment. Fire particles like photons or electrons through two narrow slits. When no one measures which slit they pass through, they create an interference pattern as if each particle behaved like a wave passing through both slits at once. But when scientists measure which path the particle takes, the interference pattern disappears. The particle behaves like a definite object. One path, one outcome, one rendered state. That's the part people can't stop talking about, because it sounds like a video game. Before observation, the system keeps things blurry, a probability cloud, a range of possible values. But when the player looks, the universe commits. Now, to be clear, physicists don't mean human eyeballs magically create reality. Observation in quantum mechanics usually means interaction with a measuring system or environment, not necessarily consciousness. The MIT physics department has emphasized that serious discussion of simulation ideas has to separate pop culture matrix talk from actual physics. But still, the metaphor won't die, because the universe behaves as though it does not always maintain a fully rendered, definite state until something forces the issue. And that feels suspicious. It feels like optimization. It feels like the machine is conserving resources. Now let's go stranger. Theoretical physicist S. James Gates Jr. and collaborators studied supersymmetry using structures called Adinkras. Their work showed relationships between those mathematical representations and certain error-correcting codes. That is the careful version. The conspiracy version says, scientists found computer code inside the universe. And you can see why that sentence took off. Because error-correcting codes are what computers use to preserve information. They help detect and fix corruption. They keep data from degrading as it moves through a system. So when people heard that simulation mathematical structures appeared in theoretical physics, they heard something else. They heard reality has autocorrect. Reality has checksum protection. Reality has code written into the basement. But here's the important distinction. Gates' work does not prove we live in a simulation. It shows that certain mathematical structures used in theoretical physics are connected to error-correcting codes. That's real. The leap from math resembles code to a programmer built the universe is interpretation, maybe even mythology. But mythology doesn't appear from nowhere. It grows in cracks. And physics has cracks. So let's pull another thread. Information. That word used to belong to books, computers, and filing cabinets. But over the last century, information has become physical. Not metaphorically physical, actually physical. Bits have thermodynamic cost. Black holes appear to store information in strange ways. Quantum systems behave as information systems. The universe, more and more, looks less like stuff and more like data. In 2023, physicist Melvin Vopson published work on what he calls the second law of infodynamics, arguing that information entropy in certain systems may behave differently from thermodynamic entropy and might point toward data optimization in nature. Now, this is not mainstream proof we're simulated. Not even close. Many physicists remain skeptical, and Vopson's ideas require much more testing. But the reason they caught fire is obvious. Because if the universe is minimizing information, if it's compressing, optimizing, simplifying, then suddenly it starts to feel like software. And software hates waste. A programmer doesn't render what isn't needed. A database doesn't store infinite detail if compression will do. A simulation doesn't calculate every atom in every galaxy unless something inside the simulation can interact with it. So what if deep space is a skybox? What if the observable universe is not infinite reality, but a boundary condition? A gorgeous, mathematically consistent wallpaper wrapped around the human experience. That brings us to the Fermi Paradox. The universe is enormous. Billions of galaxies, trillions of planets, a staggering number of possible worlds. So where is everybody? Why haven't we heard from anyone? Why does the sky feel so empty? The official answers are many. Maybe intelligent life is rare. Maybe civilizations self-destruct. Maybe the distances are too vast. Maybe we're listening in the wrong way. But simulation theory offers a colder answer, because simulating one intelligent civilization is expensive. Simulating billions? That's madness. So maybe the system only runs one: Earth, humanity, the test environment. Everything else is decoration until required. A moon landing stage built at cosmic scale. A universe with beautifully painted walls and nobody behind them. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I am saying it explains the silence in a way that feels uncomfortably efficient. Here's where the theory changes shape, because at first, simulation theory feels like science fiction. Then it feels like philosophy. Then it feels like physics. But eventually, it becomes theology. Because if the universe is a simulation, then someone built it. Or something did. Maybe future humans built us. Maybe we're an ancestor simulation running on machines in a civilization so advanced we wouldn't even recognize its citizens as human. Maybe they're watching us the way we watch ancient Rome documentaries. Maybe this is a classroom, a lab, a museum, a crime scene reconstruction, a warning. Or maybe the creators aren't human at all. Maybe they are alien. Maybe they're artificial intelligence. Maybe base reality already ended, and what we call existence is an archive being replayed by a machine that doesn't remember why it started. And here's the darker possibility. Maybe nobody is watching. Maybe the simulation was started and abandoned. A forgotten process still running on some ancient system. A cosmic screensaver. A universe with no God at the keyboard anymore. Just rules, just loops, just us. And that changes the emotional weight of the theory, because a simulated universe could mean there's a creator, but it does not mean the creator loves us. It could mean there's design, but not purpose. It could mean there's an afterlife, or it could mean death is just deletion. A file closed without ceremony, a thread terminated, a character despawned. And then there's the danger nobody likes to talk about. What happens if we prove it? What happens if the simulation becomes aware of itself? Imagine you're running a complex simulation on a machine. Inside it, little digital beings evolve. They build fire, they build cities, they build particle accelerators. They build artificial intelligence. Then one day they stop looking at each other and start looking at you. They begin testing the walls. They begin searching for exploits. They begin trying to send messages out. What do? Do you keep the experiment running? Or do you shut it down? There are people who believe this is why we should never try too hard to prove the simulation hypothesis. Because maybe the safest thing a simulated being can do is not attract attention. Maybe ignorance isn't a prison. Maybe it's camouflage. So why does this theory spread? Why do tech billionaires, physicists, philosophers, gamers, mystics, and late-night internet detectives all keep circling the same fire? Because simulation theory is the perfect religion for the digital age. It gives us a creator without demanding faith. It gives us intelligent design without churches. It gives us miracles without angels. It gives us ghosts, deja vu, the Mandela effect, synchronicity, intuition, prophecy, and coincidence, but repackages them as glitches, a server rollback, a memory leak, a corrupted patch, an old save file bleeding through. You remembered that logo differently. Maybe your brain is wrong, or maybe the universe updated and forgot to clear your cache. You're dreaming something before it happened. Maybe it's intuition, or maybe you briefly accessed a future branch of the simulation. You met the same stranger 3 times in impossible places. Maybe coincidence? Or maybe the non-player characters are being reused. Now, skeptical people will tell you this is exactly why simulation theory is dangerous, because it can explain everything. And a theory that explains everything can sometimes prove nothing. If something weird happens, it's a glitch. If nothing weird happens, the code is stable. If physics support it, that's evidence. If physics rejects it, that's the simulation hiding itself. You can't lose. And that's a problem. But emotionally, it makes sense, because people are exhausted by randomness. They're tired of being told the universe is cold, accidental, indifferent, and silent. Simulation theory says, no, there is structure. There's a hidden architecture. There is something behind the curtain. Maybe it's not kind, maybe it's not divine, but it is there. And for some people, even a machine god is better than no god at all. So, where do we land? Are we living in a simulation? Here's the honest answer. We don't know. And right now, there is no confirmed scientific evidence proving that our universe is a computer simulation. Bostrom's argument is powerful, but it depends on assumptions about future civilizations, consciousness, computing power, and whether simulated minds are even possible. Quantum mechanics is strange, but strange does not automatically mean digital. The double-slit experiment is real, but interpreting it as rendering on demand is metaphor, not established physics. James Gates' mathematical work on supersymmetry and error-correcting codes is real, but it does not prove a programmer wrote our universe. Information physics is fascinating, but newer claims about infodynamics remain debated and unproven as evidence for simulation. So the verdict is this: the simulation hypothesis is not proven, but it's not stupid. It sits in that unnerving space between philosophy, physics, technology, religion, and dread. It is a mirror held up to an age that has turned everything into data and then started wondering if data was there first. Maybe reality is physical. Maybe atoms are atoms. Maybe stars are stars. Maybe consciousness is just biology doing something beautiful and temporary. Or maybe the reason the universe feels mathematical is because it is written. Maybe the laws of physics aren't laws. Maybe they're settings. Maybe the speed of light isn't sacred. Maybe it's bandwidth. Maybe death isn't an ending. Maybe it's a logout. And maybe somewhere beyond every galaxy, beyond every black hole, beyond every equation we ever carved into a chalkboard, someone is watching the output, waiting to see what we do next. Tonight, before you go to sleep, look at your hand. Turn it over. Watch the shadows across your skin. Look at the lines in your palm, the pores, the tiny scars, the details. It feels real. Of course it does. It has to. That's the whole point. But ask yourself this: did those details exist before you looked? Or did the system know exactly when you would need them? Maybe tomorrow morning the sun will rise because the earth turned. Maybe the birds will sing because nature is alive and indifferent. Maybe the world will continue exactly as it always has. Or maybe, somewhere far outside the walls of everything we understand, a process is still running, a simulation is still stable, and your eyes opening in the dark are just another event logged in the system. Good night. If tonight's entry made the walls feel a little thinner, follow and subscribe to the Tin Foil Diaries wherever you're listening so you don't miss the next signal. And help us push this transmission through the machinery. Leave a 5-star rating and a short review, because that tells the algorithm this broadcast is worth amplifying. Share this entry with one person who still asks questions when the official answer feels too clean. Got a lead? A strange article? A document? A name? A coincidence? A glitch in the pattern you can't explain? Send it in. And read a more in-depth article about this story at thetinfoildiaries.fyi. Keep watching the seams. We're listening for the pattern. You weren't supposed to notice the loading screen.